so we'll start right away. So indeed, we are at the 11th week. We've closed last week a chapter, I would say, on green finance, and now we're entering a new one for 2 sessions on mainstreaming gender in official development assistance or development cooperation, and we will do so this week with 3 speakers, and next week with 2. And we're basically going to ask quite a few questions and gone around gender mainstreaming. Well, why? Maybe first integrate a gender equality lens in development cooperation. Why it makes sense to do so? What does it mean? What does it take in terms of frameworks, strategies, assessment, data, tools, and maybe what are also some approaches to do so, and some lessons that we can draw on this topic. So without further ado, we'll have 3 speakers, and today we're going to have 3 brief presentations from colleagues. So 3 short presentations, so around 5 to 7 minutes, and I'll be the guardian of time on this, which will allow for more interactive discussions afterwards. So don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat box, or actually, I'll also give you an opportunity to raise them. But we'll have an interactive discussion for the better part of this hour that we have together. And so we'll have the pleasure to have 3 speakers: Jenny Hedman, who is the policy analyst on gender equality and development at the Development Cooperation Directorate of the OECD, and she's also coordinating the DAC, so the Development Assistance Committee's network on gender equality, GenderNet, which is the network that brings together gender equality experts from bilateral and multilateral development agencies. We'll have the pleasure to have Vicky Dillon, who's Gender Equality Policy Lead on Development Cooperation and Africa Division at the Department of Foreign Affairs in Ireland. And we'll have Olga Pietrusova, who is an independent expert in the field of gender equality, gender mainstreaming, and equal opportunities. And she was the director of the Department of Gender Equality and Equal Opportunities at the Ministry of Labor, Social Affairs and Family of the Slovak Republic. And she was also in charge of guidelines for development cooperation. So, and I'm sure she will talk about this. So without further ado, I will already give the floor to my colleague Jenny for her first presentation, and then to Vicky and Olga, which will allow us to move to the discussion. Jenny, warm welcome. Thank you for taking the time this morning, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sydney, and good morning, everyone. Just checking that you can hear me well. I think that should be okay. Okay, so I wanted to start with a couple of words just about why gender equality and women's empowerment in development cooperation. Women and girls are disproportionately affected by hunger and poverty. Women suffer physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, and gaps in access to healthcare leave 800 women dying in childbirth every day, so mainly in developing countries. So much of this is due to harmful social and cultural norms that have negative impacts on women and girls and limit their opportunities and their rights. At the same time, we know that we can't achieve sustainable development by leaving out half of the population. I really like the comparison that you can't expect to win a football game by playing with only half of your team. So if we want to achieve the SDGs, women need to be included in decision-making processes, and women need to be able to contribute to the economy. So that actually takes me to my first quiz question. I have a couple for you today. So if we can put up on the screen the first question, which is, in a scenario in which women play an identical role in labor markets to that of men, how much could be added to global annual GDP by 2025? And I'll let you answer. Okay, are we able to see what people said? 2.8 trillion. Okay, so 33% of you were right. 28 trillion actually is the estimate by McKinsey. So that is a pretty strong case for gender equality, I would say. Moving now to some history and the global policy framework that we're using when working on gender equality and development. In 1995, we agreed the Beijing Platform for Action and Declaration and Platform for Action. This confirmed the importance of gender equality, and it confirmed gender mainstreaming as a key strategy for realizing gender equality and women's empowerment. This platform calls on governments and other actors to mainstream gender in all policies and programs, including development cooperation. So this was already 25 years ago we agreed to this. After that, the DAC guidelines for gender equality and development cooperation in 1999 picked up on this and confirmed the strategy of mainstreaming in the work by DAC members. So what does mainstreaming mean then? Well, gender isn't a sector, clearly. It's a cross-cutting concern that involves all of your development cooperation in all sectors, really. It means to already at the analysis and planning stage, think about what impacts will this program or this policy have for women and for men, and then follow through this thinking in the implementation of the program and in the evaluation and follow-up. So it might mean that you need to adjust the program a little bit to ensure that it leaves no one behind, really. So I just want to give one example. I think we may hear more today, but if we take a project focusing on local governance, for example, aimed at building the capacity of local governments for planning and for financial management, to mainstream gender here, when planning the project, one would define specific objectives to strengthen women's participation in this local governance, and also to ensure gender responsive local services that they actually kind of benefit women and girls as well. So in order to achieve this, some specific targeted actions may need to be undertaken. For example, doing outreach to women to engage them in this process. And if women aren't engaging, why not? What's hindering them, and what can we or should we do as a donor then? And also looking at what needs to be amended in order to ensure that the women and girls really do benefit from these services offered by the local government. Okay, I'll just take that one example and move on to ODA for gender equality, because at the OECD, yes, you will be aware, we collect data on ODA. And when doing this, we use a tool called the DAC Gender Equality Policy Marker to also collect data on the shares of aid that mainstreams gender equality. Some of you also use this tool, I'm aware. So the DAC members tell us how much do they spend on gender. So that takes me to my second question. If we think about this integration, mainstreaming of gender equality, what share of overall DAC aid, so the 30 DAC members, what share of that aid do you think integrates gender equality as kind of one of the objectives in programs, so mainstreams gender? And let's see if we can put it up on the screen, that question. So you'll see the options there, and I'll let you respond. Okay, well done. The correct answer is indeed 38%. Good, yes, 38% of aid mainstreams gender equality. So this isn't, in my view, it's not very high, but it's actually higher than ever before. This share is going up steadily, so that's good. Then I wanted to move away a little bit from mainstreaming, because we have mainstreaming as a strategy, but not only. Beijing and the DAC guidelines actually refer also to a twin track approach. So in addition to mainstreaming, we do need to also work through dedicated programs that have as their main and sole objectives to strengthen gender equality and women's empowerment. So this dual approach is also mirrored, if you think about it, in Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. You do have Goal 5, which is about gender equality. At the same time, you have gender indicators throughout the different goals. So an example then of a development program that is completely dedicated to gender equality, it would be, for example, a program aimed to support women who are survivors of domestic violence. So provide the health services to them, but maybe also help them take legal action against their perpetrator to really focus on women's empowerment there. And at the same time, it could also be a project aimed to educate and mobilize men and boys to become advocates against violence against women and girls in their community, because that's also, of course, directly supports gender equality. So it's not only about women, it's about gender equality and women's empowerment. So with that, and talking about this dual approach, I want to come back to the ODA data and the figure, because the DAC members also tell us how much of their ODA that they spend on this type of program. So programs that are dedicated to gender equality as the main objective. So we had 38% of ODA, the mainstream gender. How much of DAC do you think is dedicated to gender equality as the main objective? We'll see if we can put up the third question there. Well done. I feel like maybe some of you have seen these figures, which is a good thing. 4% is the correct answer. So the total here is 42% of aid that either integrates or is dedicated to gender equality on average across the 30 DAC members. I want to highlight, though, that we do have certainly some members that have much higher shares than that. And one of them is with us today. We have Canada, Sweden, Iceland, and Ireland, who all are beyond 80% of their aid that integrates or is dedicated to gender equality. So I wanted to close by just saying a few words about what it takes to do gender equality as a donor, because it takes kind of a whole range of things. We really see this in the DAC network of gender equality when we work with the gender advisors. There's no silver bullet for just magically doing gender equality. It takes starting with political leadership. We see quite a lot of this today, which is great. There are several countries that have feminist foreign policies, for example. It does take expertise and knowledge about gender. You can't really expect to just magically do gender without actually having the underlying expertise. It takes tools, so policies, strategies, action plans. I would say that DAC members are doing quite well here. All the DAC members have these type of strategies, action plans. It takes resources, and this one is, I want to stress this, it does take money. You can't just do it magically without any resources. What is positive is that financing for gender equality is increasing. There's also more and more interest in financing beyond ODA. So we're talking more and more about, for example, blended finance for gender equality, which I think is very positive. It also takes accountability and monitoring, making sure that we evaluate gender equality programs, making sure that we have gender equality objective and we're able to measure progress against gender equality indicators. And this point, I would say, I'll just end by saying, I think that there's some more work to be done here. I think that's something that many donors are struggling with and that we can continue working on. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I think you gave the political commitment, expertise, tools, resources, accountability and monitoring. I think you've given some great pillars here that we can then discuss with others in the speakers list that we have today. I'll turn directly to Vicky and then to Olga on this. Well, Vicky, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sydney, and thanks, Jenny, and hi, everyone. My name is Vicky Dillon, and I'm the Gender Equality Policy Lead in the Department of Foreign Affairs in Ireland, in Irish Aid. So it's great to be here and look forward to a good discussion about gender mainstreaming. I thought I'd start off, I'm going to give just a quick introduction of the main areas that we work in Irish Aid, and also how we integrate gender equality across the programme. I thought I might look a little bit at the operational aspects and the modalities that we use, but as well talk a little bit about key issues that we think is important for us, so including partnerships and a strong gender analysis, and then a little bit about the systems and how we work. But first, maybe I'll give you a little background on our approach and our policy approach. I think just to pick up on what Jenny was saying, like, we have just launched a new gender equality policy, or new, well, it's not new, I suppose it's 2019, so it's a year and a half old, but it's called A Better World, and it has one of 4 policy priorities is gender equality in that policy, climate change, reducing humanitarian need, and governance being the other 4. So it's kind of a new departure from us in a way, because we're really looking at a standalone focus on gender equality. Now, we did have a strong focus on gender equality mainstreaming throughout our entire programme, as Jenny said. We're quite proud of the fact that 76% this year, or in and around the high 70s or 80% of our ODA is significantly or principally contributed to gender equality, and that's been the case for a number of years. But in 2019, I think there was a really strong political leadership domestically for us around increasing our focus on not just mainstreaming gender equality, but also having it as a really strong standalone pillar. So the pillars that, and in that we're going to increase our focus on a number of particular areas, including sexual and reproductive health rights, women's economic empowerment, women, peace and security. In the context of, we're just going to move on to the Security Council. We're very honoured to have a non-permanent seat in the Security Council from January, so that'll be a big focus of our work there. Girls' education and gender-based violence, and yes, and women's political participation. So those are kind of the key areas that we're going to increase our focus on, but also continuing this mainstreaming approach. And I think the commitment there is that we were going to integrate a focus on gender equality across all of our partnerships and interventions, which is, a bit of a step change for us as well, because I think we're also hoping to look into more detail at the quality of how we engage and move from maybe a gender sensitive approach to a gender transformative approach in terms of how we understand, how we look at gender equality across our partnerships. And I think, we're really lucky here because, politically gender equality is a very important issue, but I think that's also because in Ireland domestically, for us, gender equality has been a key part of our own economic and social transformation in the last number of years. And I think historically, it's quite easy for us to argue about gender equality in our international programme, because domestically and nationally, we've seen how important gender equality has been for our own economic growth. And since, particularly in the 1970s, pre-1970s, Ireland was significantly less economically developed than it is now, but also it was more socially conservative. And joining the European Union was a major step forward in gender equality domestically in Ireland, allowing more women into the labour market, and gender across the board, implementing legislation around non-discrimination. And we really see the effect of that, I think, domestically. And I think, nationally, our own government at the moment has a citizens' assembly on gender equality, which is now to improve gender equality in our own, across all aspects of our own policy. And I think for that reason, it's easy to make the case, because everyone here can see the case in our own kind of journey and in our own transformation. So I think that's lucky in that regard, but that's also, I think, probably kind of a useful tool when you're trying to convince. And obviously Jenny set out very clearly the importance of gender equality domestically and achieving sustainable development goals. Like it's not simply a fundamental human right, obviously it is, but it's also critical to, I think, achieving broader objectives in whatever area they might be. So in terms of just the operational framework that we have, we're currently working on a few areas to integrate gender equality in the kind of internal operations to implement a better world. We're looking at accountability framework and specific targets on gender equality for the implementation of a better world. We also have an accountability framework for the implementation of our National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. We're also looking to strengthen our gender analysis across different budget areas. So across the department, we'll obviously have budget lines for our multilateral engagement, for our humanitarian engagement, for our investments in civil society organisations, and for also our country strategy planning. So there's work going on across with all of these different units to see how we can achieve the commitments around gender equality internally within that. And I think just a couple of, I think 3 things that I think for us is very important. I think for us it's also really important to highlight the importance of strong partnerships, right? We have benefited greatly from having really strong partnerships in gender equality in terms of building our own capacity, but also in terms of being able to achieve more than we might have done by ourselves. We're very strongly committed to the multilateral system and to investing in gender equality across the multilateral system and working with partners across the multilateral system. We're also really strongly committed to investing in civil society, and we a significant portion of our ODA is invested in civil society organizations and women's rights organizations. And one of the targets that we'd like to see is increasing our investments in women's rights organizations. That's one of the things we've set ourselves, because I think we see women's rights organizations and local organizations are really important drivers of gender equality in particular contexts. Obviously, we also work with the national governments and building capacity around national governments, and that's another important focus of our gender equality work, particularly through our key partner countries. And then we also have some research partners and academic partners, and we've seen in particular that how we can benefit from having strong research partners. We have a partnership with the University of Pretoria, and a couple of years ago we organised a really intensive training programme for all of our gender focal points across our mission systems, which was really beneficial to kind of build capacity with our own system to a kind of a gender transformative approach. We also have partnerships in Ireland with our own kind of local universities who provide us with technical assistance to do our own work. So I think we found that really beneficial to build our own capacity. And then I think gender analysis and a stronger gender analysis is another thing that we're looking at. So at the moment we're developing this across 2 tracks. We're developing a particular tool which will be aligned with our grant management system, and that will allow, that is going to be the practical framework for implementing gender equality through every partnership and intervention that we have. So it's looking at and providing a basic 8-page document for grant managers across our system, so they can understand the extent to which any kind of partnership they want to fund is going to look at gender equality. It kind of has a gender continuum tool, which I can go into a little bit more detail, but it looks at, whether a project is gender blind, gender sensitive, or gender transformative. And this is the kind of tools that we use to work across internally within our system to see, across the board how our investments are doing with regard to gender equality. The second piece of gender analysis that I think is a bit more, is very important, and what is a bit more, I suppose, diverse in how we look at it, is the gender analysis in our country strategy planning process. And there we work with our embassies around looking at how to strengthen gender within their country strategies, but that's a bit more of a bottom-up approach. So they will usually come to us and say, we want to strengthen gender in this particular area, and we collectively we might get a technical consultant to do a gender audit, or there are different ways that we look based on the individual case as to how we might strengthen gender. So that's another kind of way that we work in terms of looking at gender, and we use it to loads of different resources. Sometimes we would also bring in academic partners and other technical partners to support us in that. And just to finish off, a few kind of things that just struck me in terms of internally, like I'm one of 2 people on our gender team, so we don't have a strong, a huge gender team within our organization. But I think the key success that we found is that we've really been quite good at embedding gender equality across our organization, and that every advisor or every team will learn part of their job. And I think a couple of things that we've found useful to be able to do that is we have a gender network, which is a really informal network of like an email list that we send out. We have a quarterly meeting. We ask people who are doing good work on gender equality to kind of come along and present. We have a quarterly newsletter. It's a very informal system, but it really is an opportunity to bring everyone who's interested in gender equality and working on it together to kind of discuss issues, and also for us as the gender team to hear how can we be more helpful. So that's something that's been really good for us. I think training as well. We've looked at different ways of training, intensive training, easier training. We have PowerPoint, like a narrated PowerPoint that we've done, that we just saved on on our internet system that everyone can access. We have we've access to a consultant that we use that she can provide individual training to embassies, maybe 2 days of training or 3 days of training. So quite, bespoke training, but it doesn't require a huge amount of resources, but we found it really useful to strengthen our system. And then the last thing is, yeah, and I said it already, is partnerships. We found really useful to have strong partnerships, academic partnerships and NGO partnerships. And we've also found those really useful to help our own work. So, you know, when you're thinking about investing in a partnership, it's also useful to think about how that partnership might be able to help you, you know, strengthen your work across your organization in gender equality. But those are just a few thoughts, and I'd be really happy to answer any questions or expand on anything. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much, Vicky. I think that was probably enlightening, and so many elements and questions that we can raise, and I'll keep that for the session right after. So already, I'll give the floor to Olga.
Okay, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to present the situation in Slovakia, which is not a little bit, but actually totally different to the situation in Ireland. And because not only in Slovakia, but in many countries of the Central and Eastern Europe, the gender equality is becoming a very sensitive issue. Particularly in Slovakia, gender equality is on the governmental level not a priority at all. Vice versa, there is a strong opposition to gender equality, calling it gender ideology, which resulted in Slovakia in the declining of the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. So the main topic of my contribution will be how to, in such a situation, to ensure at least some focus on gender equality in the ODA framework. The official ODA framework is focusing in Slovakia on 6 sectors, which are defined in the medium-term strategy for development cooperation of the Slovak Republic 2019-2023. Is quality education, good health, good governance and civil society building, food security and agriculture, infrastructure and sustainable use of natural resources, and supporting the creation of a market environment. Besides those 6 priorities, there are 2 cross-cutting themes: environment and climate change, and equal opportunities, which originally was gender equality, but because of those problems I mentioned, it changed to equal opportunities. Again, comparing to Ireland, there is a limited gender expertise in the management of the ODA in Slovakia, and there is no gender team or gender expert at all. Therefore, with the UNDP assistance, I was hired to prepare the guidelines for mainstreaming gender equality in the Slovak development cooperation and humanitarian aid programs and projects. The result of this task is a guide called Gender Equality in Cooperation Project. This guide, I propose 3 parts. First is a theoretical one, which I will not talk about because it was at the beginning, introduced by Jenny. Then the second part, which is aimed on management of ODA, how to mainstream gender in programs and projects. And the third part is a step-by-step guide for project promoters, how to include gender equality. So I will now a little bit introduce the general framework, how the specific objectives of the goal 5, gender equality or equal opportunities, can be incorporated in the management of ODA. I proposed a general framework how gender equality correlates with the sectorial priorities. The basic principle which should be or is recommended to use is so-called dual approach, means gender mainstreaming as a cross-cutting issue plus specific projects or affirmative actions focusing on gender equality. This is what Ireland calls gender transformative projects. Besides of the cross-cutting issue or nature of gender equality within ODA, there is a need to identify specific areas of interventions To support project directly, I am aimed on strengthening women's rights and gender equality. Similar as in Ireland, we also agreed to have 4 types of projects from the point of gender equality. This is project specifically aimed of improving gender equality and empowering women in rights, which could be called gender transformative project. Particularly in the Slovak experience, those are projects to improve girls' access to education and women's economic activities, projects focusing on sexual or improving access to sexual reproductive health and rights, combating violence against women, and would be also political participation and a specific situation in women in humanitarian crisis. The second types of projects are projects with positive impact on gender equality, where gender equality is incorporated as a cross-cutting issue, at least in some extent. The third type of projects are projects gender neutral, or the question is if they are gender blind, which means there is no gender analysis done, and in fact, even if the project has some impact on gender equality or inequality, the project promoter did not specify or did not include this approach. 4 types of projects are projects with a negative impact on gender equality, which still can be identified in the Slovak practice, and in fact, those kind of projects should not be supported at all from the official development aid. The guidelines offers an evaluation matrix for a comprehensive assessment of the contribution to the cross-cutting theme of gender equality. It is recommended to apply especially in programs and projects focused on human resources, so-called soft projects in the field of education, health, business, civil society, governance, etc. The evaluation matrix is focusing on identifying how gender equality is incorporated in the baseline analysis. It means if at least to some extent gender analysis is included. Then on target groups, if women or at least vulnerable groups of women and girls are specifically mentioned in the project, then activities, which means if some affirmative actions are planned, and the situation of the project implementation and project sustainability, which means the gender impact assessment of the project. Furthermore, the guidelines include recommendation for gender mainstreaming in the ODA management in various stages of preparation, implementation, and management processes of development cooperation, particularly in programming documents, manuals, and handbooks, calls for proposal, assessment of projects, monitoring of project implementation, evaluation and implementation of the program as such, and of course, information and publicity, which is an important part of gender sensitive approach. I also included a question how to assess the evaluation of cross-cutting theme of gender equality, and proposed prior to the evaluation itself to carry out gender equality training for project evaluators. Important part of the implementation of gender equality are, of course, indicators. The minimum standard is that all indicators should be gender segregated, as segregated by gender specific data, and in the optimal case to include a set of specific gender equality indicators. So this is basically the part of how to include or how to mainstream gender equality in the ODA management. Furthermore, the guidelines include as a step-by-step step-by-step guide how to include gender equality in the project, beginnings from project planning to implementation up to monitoring and publicity. What are the main challenges which were also obviously in the preparation, particularly in the discussion with the project promoters in Slovakia? This kind of negative attitude toward gender equality in some parts of NGOs, particularly those conservatives, and which also somehow mirrors negative attitude toward gender equality in the current conservative government. More or less, this is experience from Slovakia, and I'm looking forward to discussion and answering your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga, and thank you to all three speakers. Maybe I will start by raising the well, asking if there is anybody who wishes to have a question. I saw that in the chat, Zane from Latvia asked whether these guidelines from Slovakia were available in English or not, and so that is a quick question. Maybe
the guidelines are now in the final stage, and they are not available in English, but since they are elaborated for UNDP, so there is probably a possibility UNDP to choose to, and Victoria Mlinarčíková is here also to choose to translate them in English. So not yet, but there is a possibility to do it.
All right. Thank you. Does anybody have a question? I have quite a few, but I will give you maybe just a few seconds if you wish to raise them, rather in the chat box or raise your virtual or physical hand. But I cannot see. And maybe I'll start by a question. On the Irish and Slovak experience in the guidelines, both kind of have three outcome of the gender analysis on different terms are being used: transformative, mainstream, or gender neutral or gender blind. And my question maybe for both Olga and Vicky on that would be, if the project is considered gender blind or gender neutral, is it excluded from funding, or also what kind of follow-up tools or kind of project review has to be done, and is there a kind of mechanisms for that to make sure that the project is revised to not be gender blind? Vicky, maybe you can start. Can you unmute?
Did you ask me? Sorry, I think I lost my audio for a second.
Yes. Oh, so do you want me to repeat the question?
Oh no, I got the question. No, that's okay.
Okay.
I can answer. I didn't know if you wanted me to go first or Olga, but
Yeah,
that's
yes,
fine.
please go, and then Olga can follow.
Okay, perfect. I mean, no, we don't have it's not that we won't fund something. There's no rule that if it's gender not targeted on gender that it won't be funded necessarily. I'm just looking at the figures though, and about 19% of our ODA at the moment, according to the OECD DAC figures, is not targeted. So certainly a priority for us would be to get that figure lower, right? So, and that's something that we'll be doing. And we find actually the DAC policy markers that Jenny was talking about earlier very useful to track our overall spend as a whole, because we can immediately see, we have a dashboard that we created on a spreadsheet that we can immediately see across every budget line. If it's country, if it's CSO, if it's humanitarian, we see immediately how much is significant, how much is principal, how much is not targeted, and how much is not screened. I mean, so only 4% is not screened. I mean, that's another thing that we'll be looking at, is why isn't it being screened? And then it's a, you know, trying to get that not targeted number down, as opposed to, but yeah, we've no firm rules about not funding something. It's about, you know, but making sure that things are targeted.
And Olga?
I cannot speak on the behalf of management authorities in Slovakia. Of course, there is Lucia Kiš included in the webinar, but what I proposed is to at least to ask the project promoter to integrate some parts of gender equality. But the main problems what I see is that most of the project evaluators are not gender experts, and they will not be able to recognize which projects are really gender neutral, or what are gender blind, or even with the negative impact. So the main challenge is more or less to train project evaluators to be able to recognize where is kind of problem with gender equality. And of course, it's on behalf of the management authorities or of the ODA management, how they will approach. I don't think that the projects are not going to be promoted. Rather, there will be a support how to include gender equality. But maybe you can ask Lucia Kiš.
So we have a question on the chat. So are there any strategy you work on to make gender empowerment theme somehow appealing even to a conservative mindset, rather than alienating implementers completely? There must be always a bit of ground to tackle with challenges, and just thinking about how to be more creative. And that's actually, maybe that relates to a question I want to also ask to Jenny on the kind of rationale or communication that is being used by DAC members, or to promote gender equality internally, and what kind of challenges there has been, because as you mentioned, 38% of ODA is mainstream, or mainstreams are on gender, but that leaves quite a lot. And when you see the difference between I guess the average DAC and Ireland, there's quite a difference, and quite some and maybe what are some challenges, and what are some elements that have been systematized in some development cooperation systems that are not systematized in others, and how that might help.
If I may answer
Yes.
the question of Sarif, of course there are some strategies, particularly if I can explain the problem with gender equality, that the word gender is very sensitive in Slovakia and is part of Europe, because it somehow includes the LGBT issues, and the strategy can be to focus on women's empowerment. So to make a step back from gender in development to women in development. However, it's very difficult to not to use the gender ideology, but the gender terminology at all, because you will hardly find some words for gender analysis, etc. So obviously the word gender is very sensitive, and within the NGOs or organizations which are providing or which have project in ODA in Slovakia, there is a part of a Christian-based group which will refuse to implement gender equality, but there is also a group of excellent NGOs which are very well experienced and which will do it very well. So it means the main strategy is maybe to come back to women and empowerment and talk about women and girls, but of course this is then something different than gender equality, and somehow we lose the focus of men in this approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Sorry, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So, okay, I was just picking up on a few different things. Firstly, I think when we talk about, okay, what are the kind of what makes you work well on gender equality and how can we up these levels of ODA that focuses on gender equality. I actually think that Vicky put it quite nicely as well, that you've seen your own country and the evolution there, and that kind of have an impact on how you do your development cooperation. I think you can see that quite well throughout the DAC membership, like it mirrors sort of the countries that are doing well on gender equality within their country. They're also doing well within their development cooperation. And I think like a kind of a game changer really is like that will help set you off is really political leadership. So I'll just take, for example, France, when we had Macron come in and say that he's a feminist and kind of developing a feminist foreign policy, that was quite a game changer for France over the past couple of years, I would say. So that's kind of just an example. And then in addition to that, I mean, I kind of set out a few things earlier, but just to say, I think there's kind of a balance to find between the carrot and the stick. So you do need some accountability. You need to set up your system so that actually staff are accountable for addressing gender equality, but at the same time that it doesn't become too heavy and it doesn't become like just something annoying, but that you also help staff kind of realize what the benefits are and see the incentives to kind of help them understand that actually this is really beneficial for your program. At the same time, acknowledging what Olga was saying, that of course there are some countries where it's really difficult and there are political challenges and it can be sensitive. I'd say that, yeah, probably going back to partnerships and what Vicky was saying, that it is helpful to reach out to kind of colleagues working on these issues in other countries and in other institutions to get kind of ideas of strategies. And then just quickly, also when I was talking about accountability, just touching upon the gender equality policy marker, because I do want to just, I mean, I'm not sure to what extent you're aware of this tool, but it is a tool to measure spending that all donor institutions, really bilateral and multilateral and philanthropy, etc., can use, and many are using. And I'm saying it because it's not only that, in my view. What we're seeing is that the institutions and the countries that are starting to use it, it actually creates a dialogue, and it's quite helpful because it is an OECD very official tool that many are using, and we have the figures and we can compare. So it creates a dialogue and it puts a little bit of pressure on your leadership to be kind of, okay, everyone else is doing this. How well are we doing? What does it take to integrate it? And how, okay, so if we score 1 or 2 or like why and how? And so it's actually, for me, it's actually a very political tool. It's not only about data and numbers. It is very political. It's an accountability tool. So think about it in terms of also being a helpful sort of advocacy tool internally to get your system thinking about gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And actually that brings me to a question for Vicky. And you were mentioning all the different ways Ireland was using in terms of the tools and all the things that you are doing, and I'm very surprised to learn that you're only 2 in your as gender advisors for such a result. And so I'd be very curious to know if you can explain a bit more, what is your role within the organization? And it seems that you are a kind of help desk on gender, which other can reach out to. And I think that that's a quite interesting role. And maybe you can explain a bit more, because it also shows, and as a kind of linked question, because since you give the 76% number, which is fantastic, but how fast have you gone? Have you expanded on that? So where in how many years? Because I think some participants will also be interested in, okay, how fast can we improve our system and our mainstreaming of programs and ODA. So over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't have the figures going right back in front of me. We were still in the mid 70s in 2015, but I do recall having looked at them a while ago. We were, I think it's probably 10 years. I think if we go back to 2010, maybe we were more down in the 40% or around that. So I think we've really increased in the last probably 10 years in terms of, you know, the mainstreaming element. I mean, yeah, I think we are really lucky in that we have a lot of people across our system who are very strongly in favor of gender equality. And so I think when I look, even though formally my role as gender equality policy lead, and I have one other colleague in my team, I sit in the policy unit, and this is in a way it's a relatively new role in that there's been two full-time people, myself full-time and another colleague, since A Better World was launched in 2019. Prior to that, it was kind of shared across for a few years, and then back in 2014 it was again a full-time role. So the role is kind of, yes, a bit re-established since A Better World was launched, and we're actually working on what we're doing. But it's become, in a way, what we found is that a lot of people come to us and have been coming to us saying, we need your help. We want to do better on gender. We want to shift from a gender sensitive approach where we have women and girls reflect projects to really looking at a gender transformative approach where we're not just making sure women and girls are addressed, but we're looking at the structural barriers around gender equality. And I think that's coming a lot from what they're seeing at country level. They're seeing the challenges and they want to, you know, improve and address them. So a lot of what we've done, like we did this 2-week training course from the University of Pretoria, which was very much driven by colleagues at the field who really wanted to put it together in our embassy in South Africa. So yeah, we see our role as a supporting role, bringing people together, sharing learning, developing training. We have, as I said, access to a consultant. It's kind of a 90-day retainer. So if someone comes to us, she's the professor of gender studies in the University in Dublin here. So if someone comes to us needing very high level expertise, we can deploy her for a few days. And then obviously we attend the DAC GenderNet. We engage a lot in external policy discussions, and then we share those policy documents and policy discussions across the network. So if, you know, we're learning on gender-based violence, learning on women's economic empowerment, you know, we would engage with those discussions, and then colleagues can come to us to kind of seek support. And we have a very small budget of about 500,000, which we use to support kind of knowledge partners and kind of strategic partners. And we've also, so we've just entered a partnership with ODA, the Overseas Development Institute as well, which is a kind of a knowledge partnership. So again, using them to support us to develop tools or guidance or to provide technical training. So those are, some of the kind of, that's the areas that we as a small unit work in. I think we also have gender focal points in each mission, and not all of them are full-time. Some of them do lots of other jobs as well, but it's good to have, at least informally, somebody you can nominate in a team who's the kind of informal or formal person that you can say, okay, you're the person I'll go and talk to about gender equality within your team. You know, how are you getting on? You know, what areas, you know, how strong, you know, how are you getting on in terms of, I mean, that's why the marker is quite useful as well, because we can immediately see who are the teams that are really doing well in terms of principal funding for gender equality, and who are doing well for significant, and who have quite a lot of not targeted. So, you know, using that, we can say, how can we help you to spend more on gender, or how can we help you to engage more with your partnerships on gender? Yeah, so I think it's, some of it is kind of informal in a way, and it's about opening a dialogue and kind of also finding your allies, right? Some people might be just really interested in it, even if it's not their job title. So kind of looking at how you can kind of expand that interest and work with them. But yeah, we're lucky because we do have a lot of expertise, I think, across our system.
Thank you very much. I'll just quickly say goodbye to Jenny because I know that she has to go. And thank you so much again for joining today. And we're very glad to be able to benefit from your insights and experience.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry that I need to leave, but this was great. Thank you. And I look forward to being in touch with you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe just as the kind of last question on the disaggregation of targets, and maybe I'd be curious to hear both Olga and Vicky on is this now a kind of a systematic approach to developing when there's a new strategy or when there's new targets or goals for development cooperation, whether they are multi-annual, is there this question of, well, no matter what is the target, we need to make sure that it's disaggregated on the basis of gender or not. So maybe I'll start with you, Olga, and is that something that was part of the guidelines that you developed?
First of all, just starting the video, the guidelines were more based on recommendation. There is no authority from my side to describe how they should do it, but at least if the indicators are gender segregated, it makes huge sense. And of course, the targets, there are different strategies. There can be strategy, the best strategy if it's a cross-cutting issue is really to go through the whole project, starting with planning, because if there is at least some small gender analysis included, which describes the situation of women and girls in the country or in the segment where the project is focusing on, then it's much easier to develop some activities and interventions and measure their success. So I would say depends on the strategy of the country. If there is a political will, of course, this could be, it's very similar like Austria is doing gender budgeting, that but always one goal have to focus has to focus on gender equality, but it depends very much on the authorities what they decide. But with this mainstreaming approach, if you start with gender analysis, then you automatically lead it through the whole project how to improve the situation.
Vicky?
Yeah, I would say definitely requiring gender disaggregated data is a kind of a basic minimum for evaluation for the project, for sure, from our side. It is challenging, I will say, to get that data in some cases, from in terms of partners, and I wouldn't say that data, that in results frameworks we have that all across the board, but it's definitely a minimum ask from the outset of appraising.
Thank you very much. I will leave maybe just the chance if there's any additional question, but we'll pick up on that discussion next week also with more focus on actually the COVID situation and what has been the impact on gender and the role also of development cooperation actors in that regard. If there is no more question, then I think with 1 minute in late, I will just conclude and thank again everyone for joining. Thank you to Jenny, Vicky, and Olga for speaking and sharing with us today. I think it's it's a discussion worth having in 2 sessions, and we're very happy that we can continue that next week. So again, thank you everyone, and you can start your videos and say bye, and we'll see you back next week with you, Seren, I think, taking back the moderation role, and I was very happy to do that last week and this week, and I look forward to the discussion.
Next week, our team leader, Ivan Zherzhanovsky, will be moderating the discussions, and we will have, as Sydney said, we will have Professor Ipek and Eva from CEDA presenting and sharing experiences on gender equality in light of the COVID pandemic. So please do join us in 1 week's time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.